and we appreciate all of you who joined in that time. And this is something we're going to be doing over time, and I think we shall really be learning a lot from this. Allow me today remind you that we are back into our normal session, and we have not yet finished our series on case study development. And today, our main speaker is Dr. Musinguzi, and he will be supported as usual with the two senior colleagues, our own professor, Professor Chikoma, and also Dr. Diana Ntamu. I've given the background and the CV of these people over time. I'll just maybe make a few reminders here and there. Dr. Musinguzi is a senior lecturer at Uganda Matters University. He has been the university education for more than 10 years, and he has previously served as the head of Department of Governance, Peace and International Studies, and the Dean School of Arts and Social Sciences at Uganda Matters University. Dr. Musinguzi is well-grounded in the area of qualitative work, and that's why we really he himself, he said, okay, I can make a contribution in this line. We appreciate Dr. Musinguzi, your effort. Dr. Musinguzi is among the pioneer senior colleagues that actually have been with us for over the time, and he has made a great contribution. You have listened to him presenting a number of times, and I think he is a great speaker. And also, our senior colleague, Dr. Diana Ntamu, who is the director of the MOOBS Entrepreneurship Center, and also Professor Chikoma, who is the deputy principal of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at Makerere University. Professor Chikoma, we don't take your presence for granted for a month. We don't take it for granted. We really appreciate your contribution. We think that you have made a great job. Professor Chikoma is extremely grounded. You have heard him speaking here the last 3 or 4 sessions here, and he's extremely grounded in the area of qualitative work. He's dissecting of case studies in the first and second sessions. I think they are useful. Today we are having the second last session of this, and I think next week Professor Chikoma will come back to try to close a few gaps here and there, and then we call it, we end the series on the case study methodology. But Professor Chikoma, we really appreciate you. Now allow me invite Dr. Musinguzi to take up the floor on facilitating, on developing case studies and also teaching using case studies. Professor Chikoma, Dr. Musinguzi, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed, and all the colleagues in the audience. Yeah, we are coming back to our main subject, which is about case methodology. And those of you who have been in the call, and as Dr. Walugembe has already ably explained, you know, we started way back into what is case study methodology, where did it come from, how has it evolved, how is it integrated with the theory. And then as a team, we said, okay, let us also talk about utilization of case methodology. And we said we need to look at publishing and other incidences, even beyond publishing. And then that's why we also talked about, you know, teaching cases and how teaching cases are developed, how they are written, which was the previous presentation. But then we said, okay, if you publish a teaching case, it shouldn't remain out there. I mean, it has to come to class so that we use it as a pedagogical tool. And today I'm talking about teaching and learning with cases. And of course, as it is, it means we are gravitating now between teaching case, I mean a case study as a methodology, but also cases as pedagogical tools, things that we can bring to class and add knowledge in the context of class. So my presentation today is going to be, two poles. It's a bipolar kind of presentation where we are looking both at methodology as far as cases are concerned, but also as a pedagogical tool which we can utilize in the context of class. I need to explain that so that, when you get some bits of peculiarities, then you can understand how we started and how we are progressing and how we are getting there. So because of that, these are the things I'm going to go through this morning. For those who were not here from the beginning, even those who were here, I'm going back to the brief overview of the case method, where it came from, the kind of origin, but we also have to bring it to the philosophical orientations, which we talked about from the methodological point of view, but I want to bring them back even to the context of education. And that's why then I will shift into education itself. We are scholars, we belong to the education field. Then we can briefly reflect, what is the purpose of education? What is the meaning and purpose of education? How does philosophy relate with education as it relates with methodology? And then if we are going to use teaching cases as a pedagogical approach, then we have to go back and reflect, what is a personal teaching philosophy? I don't know how many people in the audience have heard about personal teaching philosophy. Better still, those who have a personal kind of teaching philosophy. Now, in order to tie up things, we have to go back and know that cases have goals. Education has goals at different levels. How do we create that kind of alignment? And then after we have done that, then we shall now go deep into teaching and learning with cases in the context of education, but also in the context of the philosophies that we will have gone through. And then I will briefly talk about the role of the tutor. And then, hey, we are in the e-world now. How do we integrate technology into the kind of e-learning? I'll not go into the details. I may ask some of you to share your own experience. I was thinking I could share a brief case and then we ponder on it very quickly, but I'm not sure. It is going to depend on time at the end of it. So as I said, this is just a brief overview. Remember, Professor Kikoma at the beginning, he took us back into where did case method come from. And he said, when you look actually at some of the leading professions, it has been an age-old kind of practice. Why? Because when you look at the physicians, when you look at engineers, when you look at even the legal profession, physicians used to keep case notes. You are a medical doctor, you are dealing with the different patients, but they are coming from unique conditions, unique circumstances, some urban, others rural, others what. So they would keep, notes about their clients. And this eventually has become the foundation of modern medicine. So you can see case notes. We are talking about case notes. They are looking at particular cases. Yeah, even in the treatment, even in the history of the disease. That's why even up to now, when you go before a doctor, they will begin with the history about that particular ailment, about other related ailments, about your treatment record, which hospitals do you go to? They are keeping that kind of history so that eventually it guides their diagnosis and how they are going to prescribe the kind of medication. In Africa, we may not be so much advanced, but when you go to Europe and America, where families have family doctors who are consistent, they have all these kinds of histories. But for us today, you go to a clinic, tomorrow you go to a pharmacy to buy your own medicine. The other day when the sickness is severe, you go to a hospital. So keeping case notes might be a little bit difficult. But in situations where there are family doctors, they have these case notes and they understand where, the history of you of different diseases or ailments that you've gone through. Even in the legal systems, lawyers keep cases of their clients. And that's why today we are talking about case law. That's why we're talking about the law of precedence. And you know, in this, even lawyers and judges look at previous cases which have similar kind of facts. And a lawyer can say, no, there was a similar case previously in the court, and it had the same facts as this case, and the judge decided like this and this, and I'm therefore asking the judges, you know, to pick it from that and also judge like this. So you see, these professions have been kind of using case, we can call them case studies, not typically case studies because they may not have that kind of methodological rigor, but we see the incidences of using cases, and eventually we see case method being adapted into the scholarship, into the education. And people are saying, no, we can actually also use a case method to understand certain realities, to understand certain organizations, to understand certain aspects. And it came into mainly the management of education, although it is, as I said last time, shifting even to other fields of study. When you go to the Harvard tradition, it started from way around more than 100 years ago, 1900. And they have been modifying it, and it is now to other corners of the world. And as I said, as a pedagogical tool, and I'm putting this in color, it is a constructivist-oriented pedagogic tool. This is actually not my word. It is even Scott Andrews' word. So you don't think that Dr. Musinguzi, because he likes philosophy, he is trying to bring his philosophy into this. No, I picked this, the way it is written from Scott Andrews, the book that I'm using. I should have put it in the bracket. So it is a constructivist, meaning even as a methodology, but also as a pedagogic tool, it has its kind of philosophical origins into a constructivist. And those of you who have gone through the methodologies, you know, constructivist belongs to the qualitative. And that is the same narrative that we've been having from the beginning, that case study methodology is suited more into qualitative, although there could be quantitative studies that can also use, you know, the case method. Now, we said, okay, there is the publication element, but there is also other elements of usage. How is the case method utilized beyond, you know, research and publication? So we have researchers on one hand who are, you know, dominant in the use of the case methodology, and then scholars and practitioners. Yes, when you go into organizations, whether it is capacity building, whether it is simple training, they are also using cases in their work. Even as lecturers, we can also use cases in classrooms. And this is what we shall be reflecting about. Originally, it is a discovery learning kind of tool. You are into the journey of learning, into the teaching and learning process, and you are using it to help unravel the knowledge and information at different levels and at different stages, so that then you can understand whether it is the phenomenon or the reality or the environment or the circumstances within which the subject of teaching and learning is situated. And as again, when the professor was making the presentations from the beginning, he also hinted about some of the philosophical orientations that are informing the case study. And it is rooted into the phenomenology, you know, kind of studies where, you know, scholars are shifting away from reality as the natural, physical, you know, the natural science reality into the human reality. And, you know, it is a shift from the kind of quantitative into the qualitative approach. Why is this kind of shift? You know, the natural scientists were looking at reality as something that is conditioned through science. If you have a vehicle You start it, you accelerate, it moves. You can brake, you can increase the speed. You can put the indicator. You can turn left, you can turn right. The vehicle will do what you want it to do. But the phenomenologists are saying, look here, human reality is not, controllable in that kind of sense. And they say, if you want to understand any phenomenon, you have to go beyond its everydayness and you understand it in its deeper and original nature. And that's why, they begin saying a human being cannot be conditioned in the same way you would condition a vehicle. Those of you are in management sciences, you remember at the dawn of the principles of management, one of the scholars, of the leading scholars, was Frederick Winslow Taylor. Taylor was an engineer, and he was saying, if you can condition a machine to work in a given way, can't we also condition human beings and personnel in the context of work so that they can begin working in a particular way? Of course, Taylor's principles created some kind of revolution in the management sector. But along the way, especially the motivational scholars are saying, look here, it's not just a conditioning human beings to work. There are also other factors that may make them work or that may not make them work. Because phenomenologists are saying, in a human being, there is something immeasurable. There is something unrepeatable. There is something imponderable. They call it the inwardness, which makes a human being quite elusive, that you cannot study them like you would study any sea. And because of that, cases are rooted deeper into anthropological and ethnographical methodology kind of orientation, where you are looking at people and their environment, people and their conditions, people and their values, their cultures, their unique realities. In other words, it goes for the multiplicity of reality, which is at the foundation of qualitative methodology. Now we move away from there and we come back. We as scholars, we are mainly in universities. And when we reflect at education, the question I want to ask simply, from nursery to primary to secondary, to first degree to the second master's, to the second degree at master's, PhD, why are we wasting our time? Why are we wasting our money? Why are we wasting our resources? What is the meaning of education and what is the purpose of education? So that when you are going to, design your course outline, think of the strategies you are going to use, you have this question at the back of your mind. When I was in A level, I did economics, and it is surprisingly it was one of my best subjects at that moment, although I didn't move on with economics later on. And we used to look at education as an investment. You have direct costs in terms of tuition, in terms of transport, in terms of reading materials. You have indirect costs in terms of the time you're spending, the opportunity cost, the foregone alternatives. How do we justify that? So that when we are doing research into the field of education, we have the broader purpose that we are contributing to. So that when you are coming to class to teach as a lecturer, you have that in mind. We shall go into some of those elements. Can one of you switch on the microphone and tell us what is education and why education? And why should we, be investing lots of money and resources, waking up at 3 a.m. to come and, talk about knowledge generation and knowledge creativity? Please, I'm looking at my slide. I'm not monitoring the chat. Please, you can switch on your microphone or write in the chat, and Dr. Walugende will pick it from there. Why education? And why? What is the purpose? Why are we justifying the cost, direct and indirect, into the education, especially when we are having challenges of, you study nursery, you go to primary, you go to secondary, you do university, first degree, second degree, you take 10 years without a job. What is this nonsense? Why don't we even, close the ministry and do other useful things? Anybody wants to give me an answer, or you want to give the answer at the end? I'm not seeing a hand. I'm not seeing a comment in the chat room, but maybe at the end. Okay, I'm hearing someone's voice. Okay, please reflect about this. Maybe you will share a bit at the end after I've gone through my presentation in the interest of time. So I was hearing someone's voice, but let me continue. Now, since we are now moving into the field of education, then I'm going to, introduce. As I told you, we have philosophy in methodology, but we also have philosophy of education and philosophy in education. We have schools of thought that have, structured and guided the teaching and learning. Someone has a microphone on. I don't know if they want to talk or if they do not want to talk. Now, the organizer can help us disable, the host can help us disable that person. So when we go into the schools of thought, as far as teaching and learning is concerned, we have different schools. I'm capturing only 3. Why? Because we say education looks at the mind, which is the cognitive domain. It looks at the heart, which is the kind of humanistic or emotional domain, but it also looks at the actions, the hand, the 3 prominent H's in education, the head, the heart, and the hand. The head, because we have the cognitive and mental processes. And our education, the knowledge processing, it happens in the mind. This is the domain of psychology, Professor Kikoma's field. So how people think, how people learn, and how people remember should be a concern of every educationist. Why? Because we want to produce some kind of meaningful learning. That is the cognition at the mental level, at the reasoning level, at the mental processes level. When we talk about critical thinking, we are into the domain of cognition, the cognitive kind of domain. But we realize that we are dealing with human beings, and human beings have needs, they have interests. As educators, do we care about the needs and interests of learners, or we only come to class, to communicate our subject and move away and sign the attendance list? What is the centrality of social interactions and social relationships? What is the kind of teacher-learner relationship? And is that relationship promoting learning, or it is constraining learning? Do we speak only to the cognitive aspect of the students, or we also mind about the emotional perspectives? There are students who will come to class with a host of challenges. They have not paid tuition, they have domestic challenges back at home, they cannot concentrate. Do we reflect and think about that? And that's why we, in the behavioral perspective, you look at the learning environment. Learners exist within a particular environment and they interact with this environment. The environment might be supportive, it might be constraining. How sensitive are we in the education, teaching, and learning process? Even when we are using cases, especially when we begin talking about the multimedia case. Now, from the schools of thought, we come now to the, the real philosophy of education. Briefly, it's one of the foundation courses in the education field. Many of us who have not gone to the school of education, we do not understand these things because we've not been in touch with them. I'm picking philosophy, from the methodological point of view, now philosophy into the realm of education. And they also have different schools of philosophy in relation to education. There is idealism in education. There is realism in education. I don't know. You should have told me to put my thing into the presentation mode so that we can, understand it better. I mean, we can view it better. I do not realize that wasn't in the presentation mode. So we've gone through, these schools. Now we are talking about in the philosophy of science, we're talking about idealism to see how they view the knowledge and how they view the reality. It is the same thing in education as a lecturer. How do you view if you are an idealist kind of teacher, if you are a realist teacher, if you're a pragmatist? And there was an online assessment form where you answer certain questions, and the exercise will show you whether you are an idealist and humanist, whether you are a realist and behavioralist, whether you are a pragmatist and humanistic, that kind of thing. I don't know if I will be able to trace it. Marxism. Now we are getting into, philosophy in the context. We are talking about philosophy in the context of education. We go back. Philosophy remains philosophy. It does not change. It only applies to different fields in a different way. Because we are saying, when we're talking about philosophy, we say ontology, the reality, epistemology, the knowledge, then the logic, the reasoning patterns. We're already talking about cognition. So what is the logic? If you are, then the nature of values. Remember, even in education, we are transmitting, we are developing knowledge and values. We are not only, dealing with the knowledge, we are also dealing with values. Now, this is just some kind of mapping. If you are kind of an idealist teacher, what is your view of reality? What kind of knowledge processes that are going to help you, form your course outline, form your teaching and instruction strategies, how you're going to structure your teaching so that, and which kind of values are you seeking to develop or transmit or transform into the minds of the students? It can be the same for realist-based kind of lecturers. We have lecturers who are too pragmatic. Pragmatism is more into a democratic kind of domain, where, you kind of democratize the teaching and learning space. You recognize the teachers. I will come back to that. Now, when we are mapping philosophy, schools of thought and the kinds of philosophies, this is just, to give a bit of focus. If you are an idealist kind of a facilitator, from the ontological point of view that ultimate reality resides in the world of ideas. So you go to class to develop the ideas within the students about how they view a certain reality. But at the epistemological level, that true knowledge comes from reasoning. So if you are idealist, you may find yourself focusing more at the cognitive level, and even without knowing, not doing so much at the humanistic and at the behavioral level. You come with textbooks, with theories from different scholars. You want students to learn these things and reproduce them. And your own emphasis is about reasoning and, understanding the contradictions or things that are emerging, and it is stopping there. Why? Because according to you, values are absolute. They are permanent. They are unchanging. Once students have understood that, then you fold your hands, you say, okay, that's it with me. If you are an idealist teacher, as long as students have picked the concepts, they have understood a bit of the content, they can debate around it, they can identify the values. Even in the assessment, you want to understand what is this and this and this. It remains so much at that level. If you are a realist, you are going to view things, slightly differently, but you are looking at the reality, the way it appears to us, the events that are governed by the natural law. Realists are more scientific, and knowledge will come from experience, from the senses. So it means you want to trigger, the learner's experiences and bring them into the context of research. I'm doing this, to bring the foundation of the kind of strategies that we use, whether it is a case study or something else. Your logic, you want to develop critical thinking, then the reasoning and the discovery of the objective and scientific truth. That's why in terms of values, they will be looking at values as, objective, as independent of a persons. So, and this is why this is oriented more to the positivist kind of tradition, thinking, and reasoning. To the pragmatist teachers, you remember in pragmatism, we said this is mixed method. So even in education, if you're a pragmatist teacher, you know that reality is not static. Reality keeps changing. The way things were 5-10 years ago are not the way things are today. There is multiple reality. And because of that, you want to capture, the learner's experiences into the learning space. You want to expose them to other teaching and learning experiences so that they can make meaning of them. If you introduce a case study on the realities of the slum dwellers and the entrepreneurial kind of innovations, then you are saying, look here, you have your own experience, but there is another experience here. And as a pragmatist teacher, you want to vary the approaches. You don't come to class, you lecture, you ask questions and answers, you move away. No, you are not pragmatic. You are not pragmatic enough. Why? Because you believe in inductive thinking and problem solving. Inductive, where we create new knowledge, we create new experiences. And why? Because for them, they believe, values are changing. This is some kind of a mapping. And you need to begin asking yourself, even as a researcher, beyond even a teacher, even if you are okay, I'm going to bring about that later on. Here, let us, we are forming schools of philosophy in education and, mapping them along the key pillars of philosophy. If you are a Marxist teacher, Marxism is rooted into social relations and social groups. And our social groups, we have a variety of different groups. Those who are able, those who are not able, those who are affluent, those who are poor. Do you reflect that in school? You can do the mapping by yourself. What is the truth according to the nature of truth, according to the Marxist kind of oriented scholars? Truth is revolutionary. It relates with the revolutionary needs of the people that you're interacting with. Why? Because there is some level of consciousness and some kind of historical timeliness. Social consciousness, because you realize that, there are classes in society. That was Marxism. Even before you in the class, we have kids who are from rich families. They can afford the computers. They can afford smartphones. You have a kid from a poor environment who cannot afford even a smartphone. They cannot afford a computer. How do you make your teaching if you want to relate with Marxist kind of orientation? How do you empower the subaltern? Remember, in philosophy of methodology, we said Marxism is a deviant of critical thinking, critical thought. And critical thought was about empowering the disadvantaged. Even Marxism, comes to empower the kind of disadvantaged. So what kind of teaching and learning strategies are you going to use if you are cognizant of some of these limitations? Some of us will say, no, I don't care about the students. By the time they come to the university, they should be able to afford these things. Ask yourself, when you are at the university, were you able to afford these things? Some of us will say, no, if we want to look at the details of this, we shall get lost. We cannot accommodate. But are we at least conscious about these things so that when you are using a teaching kind of method and approach, can you vary depending on the realities? And in terms of logic, we have the dialectics and praxis. Praxis is the acceptable practice against customs, but also practice as distinguished from theory. We have the theoretical grounding, but we also the way we navigate, these practices. And their values for them, they are in production or productivity. Why? Because a socialist kind of state should be communistic kind of society as the best. In other words, you want to harmonize the interests of the learners across the board. If you are a kind of existentialist, you see reality as relationships and existence, and the meaning which is created by ourselves. A learner in the class is to be empowered to understand the purpose of their life, the purpose of their education, and then they take a step into kind of realizing this. Once we've understood these kind of philosophies, then we are best placed as scholars, even as researchers. As researchers, before you use critical theory, it is rooted in, Marxism is rooted in critical theory. If you are determining the problem that you are going to study and how you are going to study it, the philosophical orientation is at the back of your mind, and it makes things, a lot easier. I said I'm going to comment briefly about, personal teaching philosophy. Yes, I'm seeing, I don't know whether this comment in the chat room was about education is a process. That was from Tom Valigeya. Education is a process of receiving systematic instruction. It enlightens the experience. Its purpose is integral development of a person. Yes, Tom, we shall give you an opportunity at the end, to say that. But yes, I agree with you. It's about the kind of experiences and the purpose and how we are carving that. So if you are a scholar, a lecturer, and you have been in a university for whichever years you've been in, have you ever heard about a personal teaching philosophy? In other words, how do I view education and its purpose? You see, that is the comment that Valigeya is giving. If that is your understanding of education, then how do you view the learner and their role in the teaching and learning process? If you want to develop the skills, if it is to be integral development, if you come and lecture and give one book for reference for the last 10 years, are you promoting integral development or you are not? So Valigeya is looking at the purpose of education to be integral. Integral, it means, as I talked about in the schools of thought, it must touch the head in terms of cognition. It must touch the heart in terms of emotions and empathy. It must touch the actions, ability to do things. So ask yourself, is the kind of your course outline, the teaching and assessment producing that, or they are not? How do you view the learner? If you are an idealist, do you think the role of the learner is to sit in class and listen to what you are telling them? It's more than that. Will it bring about integral development? Then what is your role? How do you view yourself as a lecturer and as a facilitator and your role? Am I coming only to class to give my, how do you call them, slides and give brief explanations? Don't even allow students questions. We used to have a culture of professors who did not even entertain questions. They come, they teach, they facilitate, and they move away. If you want more explanation, find them in their offices. Do we reflect from a philosophical point of view what we are doing and the impact of that? So once you've understood what education is, what is the role of the learner and your role as a facilitator, then you are able to develop appropriate strategies of teaching that are going to help you realize that kind of purpose. So when you are designing the curriculum, when you are looking at the content, when you are looking at the delivery, looking at the assessment, you want to bring about all these elements into the kind of teaching and learning process. Whether you're going to use case studies or even other approaches, it's important that you have the things in mind. So the moment you bring in your personal teaching philosophy, then you go back to the schools of philosophy. As I was saying, how do you view the learner? How do you view the teacher? How do you, what kind of teaching strategy are you going to use? If in the teaching strategy you are going to put using of case studies, then case studies are more than idealistic and realistic kind of thing. You are also capturing other elements into the teaching. And how do you vary these schools so that they reflect into your teaching and learning process? Let me ask the same thing. If you are the dean of the school, if you are the head of department, How do you view your colleagues in the department? How do you view the students in your department? How much do you care about the various needs and the interests of the students in the group? If you are a manager at the place of work, what is your personal philosophy as a manager? You have to go back. What is the purpose of the organization? What are the goals and objectives of the organization? If I come in as a manager, how am I harnessing the existing resources to ensure that we achieve those goals? If you do not have that kind of mindset, then you're going to mess things up, even in teaching and learning. So it's not a question of saying, I did not prepare myself, but I have a case study, I'll bring it in a class, and it will be the end of the day. It is not as haphazard and ad hoc as that. You know, it has to go into the planning, how you view all the things. If you are a husband, what is your philosophy as a husband in relation to your wife, in relation to your children, in relation to your other friends? How do you spend the family resources? So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm saying philosophy is not, you know, that complex technical study that we meet when we are doing methodology. It is the way of life. And, you know, it helps us to reflect on some of these things. What is your philosophy as an employee in an organization? What is your philosophy, you know, as a member of the group? If you are a student and we are putting you into groups, what is your learning philosophy? How do you view your education journey? How do you view your contribution? If you are a student who does not participate in group discussions and you want to gain the marks at the end of the day, are you being realistic? When I form groups, I tell, get a group leader, these are group members, but at the end of the day, you have the powers to throw out, you know, some of the kids, some of the people have not participated. Some group members are tough, they will throw out some members. Others are more accommodative and a bit shy. They will keep them on even when they know they have not communicated. At the personal level, we are talking about pedagogy, we are talking about teaching and learning, we are talking about philosophy. So this should not be limited, you know, to methodology and teaching and learning. Bring it to other fields. What is your philosophy as a manager? What is your philosophy as a head of department? How do you view your colleagues? Do you see colleagues, you know, as people who are at your will and you can tell them and instruct and, you know, shake them up and down and do whatever you want? You are going to kill and destroy the organization. So we are talking now about utilization of cases. Why? Because if you are the head of a department and some things are not working so well in the department, you want to benchmark. You say, we are a public university, it moves. Can we go to Busitema and see how they are doing it? You capture the case of Busitema. You say, can we go to Gulu? You capture the case of Gulu. You say, can we go to Mbarara, University of Science and Technology? You capture. At the methodological level, you will have the sampling. At the practical level, you are saying as MOOBs, we are facing ABC challenges. How are other universities faring? Now you have the case of Busitema, you have the case of Gulu. Now, if you are an idealist kind of head of department who said, I have been appointed as the head, my role is to direct these other colleagues, and they are doing that work, I have no business in Gulu and Busitema, then you will do it the way you do it. But in terms of case studies, we are saying that even as a head of department, to improve things, when you are initiating things, you can capture other cases and see how they have done it and bring it into, you know, your managerial kind of operations and skills. But that will depend on your philosophy, the way you view the organization, the way you view your role as a manager, the way how you view your colleagues, the way how you view the goals. And that's why, you know, the moment you are an idealist, again, as we've said, you will be limited into, you're going to read these tables. I'm going to share my my presentation in the interest of time. I don't want to go in. Okay, I can briefly run through. If you are an idealist teacher, you believe the learner has innate ability to learn, but they learn what has been taught to them. So you come with accumulated body of knowledge and wisdom, and it's what you want to give to the learners. because that is your perspective. You are studying history. I mean, you are teaching history, you are teaching literature, you are teaching even entrepreneurship. You think entrepreneurship is in the body of knowledge and theories and models that have been, and this is what you are exposing to students. If you are a pragmatist, you say, no, yes, this is one set of experience, but there are other experiences. Can we take them to the field? Can we bring case studies so that they can interact? You vary the kind of methods and approaches. If you are a realist teacher, you think there is an essential knowledge up there which has been accepted, and you come as an expert, to transmit that kind of information. You want to use some kinds of methods and established criteria. It is subject-centered. We are saying if you are a pragmatist kind of, the learner is naturally good, but he learns better by doing and by discovering. So you want to use teaching and learning experiences which are going to enhance the discovering. It's not just giving them the theories, but it is also asking them, can you apply these theories to certain realities? Can you develop your own theories? Hey, can you look at different situations and interpret them? So, and a case study becomes a powerful tool, to a pragmatist teacher. You say, okay, what is your case? Students, in the next class, I want each one of you to come here, talk about the case from this. Next time, okay, I will give you my case. At a later stage, you'll develop. They are more in charge, and they are driving, their teaching and learning process. If you are a Marxist or an existentialist, there is also the way you are going to view the learners. Marxists, they value human labor, and they're quite authoritative, but they are also subject-centered. This is how we do, the kind of mapping, so that then we can be able to relate the philosophy into our different realities. That's what I said, even practitioners, they can also use case studies. As a head of department, you can use a case study. As a manager in an organization, you go out there and benchmark to see how similar organizations are doing it, so that there are lessons learned. And that's why we talk about, benchmarking. It is very important. Now, this is why I'm talking about aligning goals and objectives. And then I will come back to, the case teaching, again, reflecting on some of the things. Remember, we are citizens of given countries. If you are in Uganda, you are a Ugandan. If you are in Kenya, you are a Kenyan. Whichever country you are in, there are certain principles and policies and strategies and objectives, even at the national level. At the university level, when I receive mails from MOOCs, at the foot, I see the vision, I see the mission, I see the values, I see the goals and objectives. Do we put them there simply because ICT put it as a signatory kind of thing? Or we reflect it when we are doing research? We reflect it when we are teaching and learning, when we are managing teaching and learning. We reflect it when we go to the communities. They are not just there for decoration. They have a purpose. Now, the faculties and departments also have vision, they have mission, they have values and goals. How are faculty vision and mission and goals reflecting the visions and mission of the university? And how are they contributing to the broader national strategies and objectives? If you are developing a program in energy and mineral resource management, how does the management of minerals and energy contribute to the broader national development priorities? How do they strengthen the niche of the university? So that at the course level, even when you are doing course description, when you are talking about teaching objectives, they are aligned. How does the teaching of principles of management contribute to the goals and objectives of the program, contribute to the vision and mission of the department and faculty, and then contribute into anchoring the university, but also at the same time, contribute to the broader national objectives. If we do not do that, then we become disconnected. One of the lecturers will be saying, these public universities resources are not there, and you are complaining before students. Should you be doing that? How you structure content? Content should be aligned. Teaching and learning strategies, even the assessment. And of course, we are going to ask, if you are using a case method, Are you using it as an instructional pedagogic tool, or you can also use it for assessment? And when we talk about assessment, anyway, what do we mean? Traditionally, from the educational perspective, we have the formative assessment and we have the cumulative assessment. Formative is the assessment that goes on when you ask questions in class, when you give a quiz, when you give a simple test. But cumulative is at the end of the semester or at the end of the term. And even in innovative assessment, we are saying, while cumulative assessment was always there to assess learning, assessment of learning, to establish whether learning has taken place or not, now we need to shift and also look at the assessment as a way of more learning. In other words, if I give a coursework or I give a take-home examination, I'm allowing students the opportunity to even learn more. So is it assessment of learning, or it can also be assessment for learning? But you will have that clarity once you've looked at, what are the goals and objectives at different levels? How do I align? And then you can begin talking about, remember, Dr. Diana presented this. When you are forming these objectives, you have to bear in mind the blooms. We begin with the lowest level. What do you want students to remember? What do you want students to understand? What do you want students to apply? What do you want students to analyze and evaluate and create? So if you are using cases as a deductive and an inductive tool, as a deductive, you want them to apply the case to their own realities. If you are using an inductive at the highest level, you want them to create, other theories and other alternatives. But at the higher level, we have evaluation and analysis. So as scholars, how do we, structure our teaching and learning objectives, from the course outline, course unit level, introduction to psychology? What is it that I want students to remember in this? What do I want them to understand? What do I want them to apply? What do I want them to analyze? And how do you structure the content and the assessment and the teaching and learning strategies so that you are able to achieve these things? This is not just a beautiful picture that we cast out there. It is a tool that helps us, to apply these things. So that then when we go to the actual use of case study, then we are asking the same questions. How do you want your students to learn? And how is the use of the case study going to contribute to that? What motivates your learners in their situation? We said if you are a behaviorist and a humanist, you must know your learners. You must know when they are weak, when they are strong. You must know when they are active and when they are not active. And you want to motivate them. How do you motivate the teaching and learning to ensure that it takes place? How do we know that learning is taking place, and what can be done to ensure that learning is effective and impactful? I actually go to these questions from Scott Andrews. These are not my questions. Student learning through case studies, genuinely meaningful? Is it relevant to the needs of the current and future situation, especially the workplace? So you are structuring the teaching and learning, to reflect the realities on the ground. What could we be doing differently to enhance the participants' capacity for learning with cases? We shall have different experiences. Sometimes you use a case, it works. Another time you use a case, it doesn't work. So what has gone wrong? How do you restructure it? Is it content? Is it the way you applied it? Is it lack of preparedness? Is it that the students did not prepare enough? How does the case fit into your program planning? This is very important. As I've said, when you are developing the course outline, or, for the new program, we get course outlines. And as lecturers, sometimes, there was a practice where a lecturer moves away from the course outline that is in the program, and they use maybe a previous course outline they got from another university when they were studying. It is 30 years ago, and you think that course outline is still going to help you, especially if you are good at record keeping. It is 15, 20 years since you are in the university, and you go and pick the course outline that you use. when you were a student at bachelor's 25 years ago. Now you come to class, the head of department and the dean, they have the new curriculum, they have the curriculum, and they have the new course outline. You look at it, you don't want it because it has things that you don't know, the things you've not interacted with. So when you are, and you know, at the university, we are given that kind of latitude to vary the course outline. But how much can you vary? And how is your variation explained and justified? As deans, as heads of department, do we look at the course outlines of our lecturers? Do we compare them with the course outlines that are in the programs? Do we see the variation and what explains that variation and whether it is justified or not? All we are bosses at the university. I can teach whatever I want and assess the way I want. Do we reflect about these things, you know, in the program meetings? If you are a pragmatist teacher, should a course outline remain the way it is? We said you are democratizing the class. I have personally now sharing the experience. You go to class, you are going to teach public policy. You have a director from a ministry, you have a chairman LC5, you have a retired civil servant. Who are you to think that you will come to teach these guys, you know, public policy? So I say, okay, this is my proposed course outline. Is there something we can reduce or add? I do it for human rights. You're going to teach a human rights class. There is a programs manager from Foundation for Human Rights Initiative. There is someone who has been in the Human Rights Network. There is someone who has worked with the government, maybe in the Human Rights Commission. They have the needs and interests. Remember when we were talking about pragmatism, you are recognizing. So I say, hi guys, this is my course outline. Can we reflect about it and see if there is something from practice that we should add, or something that may not be very useful and we subtract? Then we even democratize the teaching strategies. I want to give some guiding lectures, but I also want students to do ABCD. Are we going to do it? Is this democratization of class anyway a useful thing, or it can take you away? Should it be permitted, or it should not be permitted? How do you democratize the class to the extent that even students determine the course outline? If I'm doing that for the master's students, because of their experience, because of their knowledge, should I do it for the bachelor students who have just emerged out of senior 6? It is your perspective. Are you a realist? Are you an idealist? Are you a humanist? What kind of approach are you going to use? So now, when we are going to use case studies, I'm picking some insights from the scholars. There is one from United States who says the case method is not only the most relevant and practical way to learn managerial skills, it is exciting and fun. He's saying it is relevant and it is a practical way of learning managerial skills. And he says, hi, if you do it so well, it can be fun. It can be exciting. But he puts a caution. It can also be confusing, especially if you don't know how much about it. And that's why we are talking about cases, so that, we strengthen our own skills. It can be confusing. You can present the case, students get lost into the details of the case, but does it contribute to the teaching and learning objectives? Does it contribute to the vision and mission of the university? We have someone from Hong Kong who says the case method is a powerful approach to teaching and learning business subjects. We are saying it could also go for other subjects, but what is emphasizing is it is a powerful kind of approach which you can use in the teaching and learning. So, but its main advantage is that it is a question-oriented as opposed to solution-based. And I wanted to ask, do we agree with this? Yes, it is more question-oriented, but is it not also solution-based? Or what dominates the approach to teaching? And saying it allows students to participate in real-life decision-making processes. You are allowing students to participate because there is a case. You have gone to YEC. You've looked at the entrepreneurs, their situations, their realities. You have an entrepreneurship class. Many of them are coming from air-conditioned houses. They do not know the hustle of an ordinary entrepreneur in the market. And then you are telling them, look here, your reality might be different, but there are other realities on the ground. So then the students will be able, and that's why also the cases that we use. If you are going to a bachelor student, bachelor's class, are you sure, these kids are well versed with the knowledge, with the terminologies, with the content, with the reality? So how much of content are you going to give them? What kind of the sequencing are you going to do to make sure that they go through these cases in a more meaningful way? So it allows students to participate in real life. But some of these real life situations are so distant from the students that are before you, and they will not make any meaningful contribution to it. So how do you then determine? Yes, we are saying we were going to, I have where we are determining how do you determine the suitability of the cases. So a case, an insight from Switzerland. A case is the description of a real situation. We said it is rooted in anthropology and ethnography. So it is a real situation on the ground. But remember, we said it can also be fictional. But even if it is fictional, it speaks to a particular situation, irrespective of its fictional nature. And it has a protagonist who has to decide something. So you must make a decision. And the data in the case are likely to be incomplete, especially when viewed from the real world. And we said you can write a case today, 2-3 years later, the realities, the facts have changed completely. So how do you then ensure that it becomes meaningful, but at the same time, create the impact? And I remember, I don't know whether it was, I've forgotten whether it was Dr. Abahu who was saying, how do we then use such cases? And my explanation that I had given last time was, if you have a case that is describing a certain reality, and the realities have changed, or you think the realities have changed, then one way of doing it, bring someone for for a guest lecturer, but who comes, to provide additional insights as far as the case is concerned. Don't introduce them from the beginning. No, give you a case, let the students interact with the case. Then at the end of the day, he can do it like that. Maybe the other way of doing it, you wrote a case on a given reality of a of an organization. Now, in the media, in reality, things are not going well. People are complaining. So you have your case, which is describing a previous reality. And now you have a new reality. It is in the press. It is everywhere on social media. And you realize your case is not going to strike, because what people are thinking about that organization are completely different. So can you do it the other way around? Pick some quotes from the media. Pick some quotes from the social media. Come and impress them before the students. This is the reality in this organization. How would you deal with it? Then after you've exhausted that, tell them, hi guys, things begin from somewhere, they progress in a given way. Would you like to know how this organization was 35 years ago? They'll say, yes, we want to know. Do you want to know how things evolved from the good to us? Yes, we want to know. Then you bring your old case, give it to them. They can make connections. They know the reality at the moment, then they will make sense. If you begin with your obsolete case, they'll say, lecturer, you are joking, eh? Things have changed. But when you begin with the reality and you exhaustively discuss it, you can come just with picks, just like I was giving these insights. Pick insights from the new vision, from the monitor, even bring the cuttings or the papers themselves. Place them before the students. Let them discuss the reality as it is. At the end of the day, ask them, do you think this organization was like this 5 years ago? We don't know. No, it was different. Do you know things evolve? Sometimes there is success, sometimes there is failure. Yes, there is. Would you like to know, how the organization was 5, 10 years ago? Yes, we would like to know. Then bring your old case. It is going to make sense. It's not about, saying, I have a case study, I'm going to bring it in class, and things are going to work. You might get some shocks. So that's why we are saying the data in the cases are likely to be incomplete, and the reality might have shifted and it has changed. Then how do you innovatively bring your case so that it serves the original purpose it was supposed to serve? And we can do it in different ways. The style of a teaching case is vivid, it is realistic, it is convincing. If you do not make it vivid, it will not be vivid. If you do not make it realistic, you are going to create confusion. If you haphazardly introduce it without, taking care of the details and the realities, you will not be convincing. They will think you are a liar. They will think you are outdated. They think you don't know what is going on in the reality. So it compels students to take the role of the decision maker. Most of the cases, yes, you want the students, to make a decision in the organization, to think as if they were in the same people in the organization that you are talking about. Why? Because you want it to be analytical, you want it to be creative. And this is an insight from someone from Netherlands. The style of the teaching case is vivid, it is realistic, it is convincing. It's you to make it. If you do not make it vivid and realistic, it will be very boring and unconvincing. So now, we are using cases. Why? Because they provide hands-on practical opportunities to explore real-life situations. There is a real-life situation as an experience you want to introduce to the students and allow room for theory application or theory generation. We've been emphasizing this. Cases, yes, should not even be simple for knowing and remembering. They should also be for evaluation and analysis and application and generation of new knowledge. So you can use an inductive approach or a deductive approach in the teaching and learning of cases. Yes, if there's undergraduate students and you want them to know about knowing, and yes, you can begin from the Bloom's taxonomy from the lowest level of letting your learners know that there are certain situations which are different from the realities they know. There are certain constraints in the entrepreneurial reality where people with ideas are not able to put ideas in reality. And if such elements are captured in the case, then students are able to know, they are able to remember. But is knowing and remembering enough? They need to evaluate, they need to analyze, they need to apply, some of this knowledge. And therefore, when you're using cases, it is important that these cases are able to motivate learners and attract active engagement and participation. The moment you introduce a case and you ask a question and nobody responds in the audience, then maybe things are not doing as well as I thought. Why? Because it is supposed to promote effective and impactful learning. Effective and impactful learning. Remember, in the designing of the objectives, we have the goals, we have the objectives, the teaching and learning objectives. It is what you as a facilitator is going to do to the class, the teaching and learning experiences you're going to introduce, the methods of learning and assessment you're going to use, and at the end, the learning outcomes. Students should be able, one, to reflect the knowledge, number two, to remember and recall some of these things, but also to analyze and evaluate, and then to apply the knowledge. If that is the case, are you sure that the case you are using is producing that? You can bring an exciting case which attracts a lot of debate and excitement, but at the end of the day, if you asked them, so what? Has it contributed to the learning and of the outcomes? Many of them will say, no, it was an exciting thing, but I don't know how it relates with the learning objectives. So for it to be impactful, you don't get carried away by the emotions and excitement of the discussing of the case, you pause and ask, are we achieving our learning outcomes? If you are not achieving your learning outcomes, then the question is a good case, but so what? And the moment there is so what, then it means you are not creating the impact that you are looking for. Some people look at cases, to give practical and employable skills. You are opening students to begin to understand how organizations operate, to begin to understand the issues and the challenges. And then they are volunteering solutions on how best to address some of these challenges. So, and that's why it enhances learning experience. Teaching and learning is mainly about the teaching and learning experiences that we expose students to so that they can be able, and as I said, I gravitate between teaching and learning and even research. If you've been a lecturer of entrepreneurship for the last 10 years, why should you be having a problem identifying an area where to do research? It's not acceptable. Why? Because you've been interacting with a given reality. And yes, many of us scholars, we've been lecturers, we are now doing PhD, even we've been managers. And then you say, Dr. Musinguzi, I'm having a problem, getting a problem for my research. Then my question will be at the philosophical level. How deep have you been interacting with the reality in a class, in the organization, that up to now, you don't know the issues and challenges where you can craft as many, even as 100 topics of your research? It means you are a manager, you know who comes, you have the terms of reference, you are instructing these people to do their work. There is an assessment criteria of performance. They have performed or they have not performed, and it stops there. That's why I'm saying the personal philosophy of you as a manager, it's not just limited to your, course terms of reference. It is about the vision and mission and the aspirations and the values of the organization. So don't say, for me, as long as I do my terms of reference, I supervise these people, they produce the reports, that's all there is for me to do. It's more than that. So what kind of experiences are we bringing to our realities so that then, if you are a researcher, you are a manager, you did your bachelor's, you did your master's, now you've come to MUBS to do a PhD. You've come to Uganda Matters University to do a PhD. How is your previous reality as a manager, as an entrepreneur, influencing the kind of research you're going to do? If you are going to do the case, where do you think you'd get an excellent case? If you are to bring this into class, how best do you introduce it into class? So we are talking about cases as pedagogical tools, but we are not losing sight of them also as methodological tools. But of course, we have to be cautious. The moment you come into the teaching and learning, the methods may vary and the rigor and depth might be lost completely. But can we cross-fertilize, the knowledge of the rigor of case study into even these other fields in which we are rotating? So then, if you're going to use case study, then we have to, yes, we have talked about this before. What are the components of a good study? One, it should be a relevant story and a relevant situation and a relevant reality within an organization, within an environment, within a given context. And because of that, we want to bring it to the teaching reality. So that story must be well aligned to the teaching and learning objectives. That's why I went back to the issues of design. When you are designing the course outline, you have the teaching and learning objective, you have the learning outcomes, and you're going to use a case study. Ask yourself, which of the learning objectives am I satisfying? Which learning outcomes am I getting out of these students? You do not do that, then the case study is going to be stale and useless. It might create some excitement, but it is not helping you to achieve your initial objective. Even a case study from the methodological point of view, you are doing entrepreneurship and you want to do a case study. You have the objectives of your research. Which kind of case reality is going to help you achieve your objectives? it is possible you can make a mess on the kind of case study you've chosen. And the realities there are not fitting the realities. That's why we go back to philosophy. Ontologically, what is the nature of reality that you're interacting with? Epistemologically, what is the knowledge that is informing this reality? And therefore, is the reality and the knowledge consistent with the case that I'm going to use? You can blunder on the case and you get lost along the way. So we go back to philosophy. What is the nature of reality I'm dealing with? What is the knowledge? What is the problem that I'm addressing? What are my objectives and research questions are? Does this study have enough ingredients in it that are going to help me address my research objectives? It is the same framework. Even in teaching and learning, it is the same thing. But even in research, you can blunder and use a case study which is not relevant to the problem or which is not comprehensive enough to address the realities and the nuances that exist in your research objectives, in your hypotheses, in your research questions. So then the critical thing is, how do I align my study problem, my research objectives and questions with the reality of the case that I'm picking? If you are talking about rural entrepreneurship, why are you choosing a case study which is peri-urban? Why don't you go to a rural situation? And some supervisors may not detect these things. You say, I'm doing entrepreneurship from a rural point of view, and you choose a case study of Nakawa, and you think Chinawataka is a rural place. Then what does rural mean? What are the ingredients of the rural? And is Chinawataka the same way as a deep village in Kamuli, in Tungamo, wherever? So the case study must be aligned, to the problem and to the teaching and learning objectives. I mean, to the objectives and research questions. The same way it should be aligned even in class. And it must be well focused. You are either focusing on leadership, on management, on branding, on quality, on decision-making, on stakeholders, on strategy, or some mixture of this. The moment you do not have the focus, then you do not have even the clear teaching and learning objectives you want to achieve. Because if it is leadership, then you want to understand what are the leadership styles, what are the leadership, skills and qualities. What makes effective leadership? What does not make effective leadership? And you want to know that the case is actually highlighting those things. You want to look at management. You want to look at branding, if that is your focus. If you are saying branding is an important aspect of business competitiveness, and my case is about the branding within MTN or within any other organization, then you are focusing on branding. You are not mixing things. The case studies must be, so a good case study should be, relevant. It should be well aligned to the teaching and learning. It must be properly focused. If you do not have a clear focus, then you are going to mess it up as a pedagogic tool. You're going to mess it up as a methodological kind of orientation because it lacks deep philosophical grounding. Do you have relevant data to make the case effective? Relevant data. So you will go back to the methodological rigor. You are collecting data about this case study. How deep are you? How adequate is the information that you've generated? What kind of depth is it going to create when you are using it as a pedagogic kind of tool in class? And we said there should be controversy and dilemma. Why? Because we must make decisions. We must make our mind about a particular situation. Now there is all a debate about the length. Different publishers will look for different, but again, even the purpose, even the content. So, but usually the shorter, the better. Of course, the question will be, how short is short? I'm not going to answer those technical questions. Some people, yes, you've been facilitating an MBA class in your university. You have the entire semester, you have 13 weeks. and you have a case study, which you can do even along 2-3 weeks along the way. And now Uganda Management Institute has started an executive master's program where they are picking, the line managers, the product directors, and it is not as comprehensive. And they have only 1 hour in every evening. And then they say, okay, you are a facilitator from MOOBS. We have our executive program. We are inviting you as a facilitator to pick a case and facilitate using a case. You have your case, which has been running for 3 hours, even other 3 hours in the next week, and they have only 1 week. And they will tell you, okay, these are executives. Your facilitation with the case should take not more than 30 minutes. And you want to use the same case, then you will have to sit down and say, okay, I have a case, but I have to pick the key points within the case and condense it from 12 pages into 1 page or even half a page. So the purpose and the environment will change, and it may force you, to readjust. All it is the same case. Do you introduce it the same way to bachelor students, the same way you do to the master students, or you want to do, some kind of varying? So the question of shortness, completeness, the content is very important, but it may be relative, to the kind of audience that you are addressing and to the depth of the knowledge that you want to put. If it is an executive program, then your assumption is, remember we talked about assumptions. Even we have assumptions in teaching and learning. Your assumption is, if these are executive guys, they have been in business for the last 20, 30 years, there is a level of knowledge that they have. So I'm not going to put a lot of, the realities and the experiences. No, you say I'll begin with the dilemma, and then the directional way out of this dilemma. Maybe they will quote from their own experience. You might get shocked that some people have been managers, but they are also alien to some of the experiences. But at least you have an underlying assumption that a master's class, an executive class, a PhD class, guys are well knowledgeable. So if I'm facilitating at a PhD, I don't want to, bother myself, go into so many details. But you might be wrong, meaning that if you want to use effectively the case study, it is also good to know about your students. How much do you know about your students in terms of experience, in terms of their expectations? That's why usually my first class is, I want to know you, you want to know me. Tell me what you did at bachelor's, tell me what you did at master's. Tell me. Of course, that works for smaller classes. If you are in a class of 200 students, you may not be able to get that. But at least you can have a generic introduction. Hey guys, how many of you have worked with the government? Sample 2. Which areas have you worked with? How many of you have worked with the civil society organizations? Pick 2 volunteers to tell you about their experience. I mean, so that you have an idea of these guys that are before you. You might pretend, you're effective lecturer and you know these things. When there are guys who are more knowledgeable in terms of content of the things you are talking about, you've read textbooks, they have lived with the reality for the last 30 years. How do you create? We talk about convergence and divergence. Those are the things I'm going to end with. Convergence and divergence. Do you want to allow students to even drive you beyond what you had thought before? If you are an idealist and a realist teacher, you want to keep it to your course outline, to your slides, and what you know. If you are a pragmatist teacher, you do not pretend to know everything. You do not pretend to be the expert. You realize the other experts in the audience. Then you allow the divergence. Hey guys, tell me your experience. Don't even bother whether they scandalize some of your held beliefs. That is part and parcel of learning. That's why, yes, I'm going to, I think that is why I will be talking about, cases should speak to the lecturers the same way it speaks to the students. You are also learning through interaction. They must be well structured and they should be easy to read. If you bring a case which is very difficult, and that's why teaching and learning cases should not be written with that strong intellectual and disciplinary jargons. No, you want to write it in a simple prose that is accessible to the reader. So avoid so many jargons and the problematic language. How do you select a suitable case? We know every case is different in terms of design, in terms of content, in terms of context, even writing styles and purpose. So what does that mean? It means that some things you need to look at. You want to ask yourself, what should you look out for when searching for the right case to use? There are so many issues to consider, detailed criteria, but I'm looking only at two things. Look at the anatomy of the case, and I'm going to talk more about this. Then different aspects or types of the case, the kind of content, the sources of content, the sources of data, the presentation, design, and structure. These are the things you can think about. But importantly, be aware about the anatomy of a case study. And it is a hexagon, with 6 sides and asking 6 important questions. This is not linear, it is cyclic. You can begin from anywhere. But, people want to ask questions. Who am I having in mind? What is it that I want to give to them? Where am I finding them and when? And why do I think this is the most important thing? And how am I going to use it? It may not be as direct and as strict as this, but you are asking questions. Who is going to consume this case? What? Okay, the questions are here. The anatomy of the case. Why are you using a case at this point in the program? This is what I said earlier. You do not wake up in the morning and say, oh, I did not prepare for my class, but I have a case. Let me go and give it to students. It will occupy them until when I'm ready next week. You are not sincere to yourself. You are not sincere to the students. You have a convoluted kind of teaching philosophy, and it is not going to help you. It's not going to help students. But we often do it. Do we think about it? Who are your target students? And how knowledgeable are they? Are they bachelor students? Are they master students? Are they PhD scholars like the ones we have in class? Then how deep and how relevant is the case to this particular target audience? And you want to ask yourself, what subject area and learning objectives are you seeking to fulfill? We've already talked about this. You are not just using a case as a passing thing. No, you are using it. Even in research, you are not using a case study because you have had 2-3 scholars using case study and you think it is the best. Sometimes you say, I'm going to use a case study. That's why we go back to the philosophies. What is the philosophy that is informing the case study? Is it positivist? Is it constructivist? Or it is a mixture of the two? How does it view reality? Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? And then what are my research objectives? What are my teaching objectives? How is the case study, aligned to where I am going? Where does the story of the case take place? Stories take place within given settings and within given contexts. The case that was presented, it went into a semi-urban, a peri-urban setup in Islam, where people are struggling to make meaning, from a pragmatic point of view, even existentialist point of view. They are struggling to make a living out of their unfortunate circumstances. That was the setting. You can have a setting of an organization. You can have a setting of a different community. And there is a particular context. It could be management. You remember we talked about focus. It is the focus that is going to determine the context. If you're focusing on branding or on quality or on what, then you are getting to the context. When in the course program will this case be used? We go back to Bloom's taxonomy. There is the knowledge, there is the understanding, there is the evaluation, there is the analysis, there is the application. So you're asking yourself, at what level in the program am I going to use this case? And of course, as we said earlier, which learning objective is it contributing to? Do I begin with the case, or I begin with a lecture, explain and tract questions, put students in groups, and then after 2-3 classes, I can go to my case studies? That's why it should be part of the design, part of the programming. And there should be, that alignment. It's not there, you're in trouble. How do your students learn best? And how are you planning to deliver the case session? You've understood your students. You know their strengths, their weaknesses. You know when their morale is down. So, from the education point of view, you must know your students. You are not having 100 students in a class. You are having 100 different individuals with the different challenges, with the different realities, with the different abilities, with the different disabilities. So how do you motivate them? How do you capture their best interests to reflect in a class? And because of that, then we need to reflect at our role as tutors, as lecturers, as facilitators. And the word which is highlighted, I pick it again from Scott Andrews. The case tutor is a learning facilitator on a voyage of discovery. We say the case study started from discovery learning. You want them to discover the realities. You want them to interact with given situations. But it is a voyage of discovery. Discovery does not just take one moment and you've discovered everything. It can be successive, subsequent, and it is a journey. And your role as a facilitator of the case study is knowing the journey. The journey has a starting point, it has the destination. And the destination is your course outline from the beginning to the end. When you put learning outcomes, by the end of this course, students should be able to, that's how we write learning outcomes. By the end of the course, students should be able to, and you use active, verbs, explain, apply, evaluate, such kinds of things. It is a voyage of discovery. They will not do that in the first and 2 classes. No, it is sequenced in the programming and the design, of the course. And when you are designing, you are having that in mind. The notion of voyage of discovery, as I have said, does not apply only to the learner. It applies as well to the tutor. If you are not open-minded as a facilitator, you are not going to grow. You are in a class of practitioners, of senior people. As I said at the beginning, you go to teach public policy and you have people who have been in the policy space for the last 15 years. I've only read about policy. I've not worked with government. So you are also discovering, you are also learning. That's why we say, if you are an idealist teacher who thinks you are an expert, you begin fighting and complaining and quarreling with your own students. If you are closed-minded and you think what you know is the best, you will have problems. The first time I supervised a master's class, supervising dissertations for master's students, I had about, were they 3 or 5 students? I had a very big class, and group, and it was for the first time. The person that I regarded as the best was the deputy cow in a district. And he was assessing the revitalization of community development function. Revitalization. Revitalization means you are bringing the new perspectives into the community development function. And for me, I'd brought it so well and I'd given him the highest mark. Now there are 2 examiners. One examiner agrees with me, gives him a highest mark. Another examiner, whom we knew as an expert in local government in the university, gave him the lowest marking, even a failure, less than 50. I think that time pass mark was at 50. Now, the guy comes to defend and he defends his dissertation so well. Now the chair of the panel is asking, we have a contradiction. 2 examiners, one examiner is saying the research is very good. Another examiner who is an expert in the field, where is the problem? And the first mistake the examiner did, he only put results, and the comment he put, the dissertation falls short of what is expected for a master's graduation. And then as a supervisor, I said, what does that mean? We have a marking guide about the topic, about the problem, about the methodology. Can this guy give comments on each of these and show how the problem is not realistic, how the theory is not applying, how this? And what was the difference? The difference is this expert in local government was not yet schooled about the revitalization process, didn't know anything about it. And he comes with a closed mind of saying, I've read in Sibambi, I've read so and so about local government. This is what local government is about. He's not aware about the new innovations. How closed or open-minded are we as lecturers? At the end of the day, the panel had to prevail. And the student passed with less marks and with a fight in the audience. So the voyage of discovery applies both to the tutor as it does to the learner. We must be open-minded. Learning through, the case studies help learning through inputs, discovery, and reflection. There is an input from the facilitator. There is an input from the students. The facilitator got the discovery when they were writing the case. Students should discover when they are reading, when they have read the case. Sometimes you will distribute the case to the students, and half of the students have not read it at the time of the class. And it is a big case. They have not. You are going to find problems. They are not going to reflect. So that's why I will talk about preparation, I think, as the last thing. Why are we valuing cases? Those of you who have read about Confucius philosophy, Confucius was a Chinese philosopher who determined the societal and political issues, which have even up to now influenced the culture of much of China and the East Asian countries. And in his philosophy of teaching and learning, he says, tell me and I will forget. If you just tell me, you just lecture for 3 hours and you move out. Tell me and I will forget. Show me and I may remember. So go beyond telling and show people. Send them to the field. Give them the case studies. But involve me and I will understand. We go back to the philosophies of teaching. Are you an idealist who think you are an expert and your role is to come and give students your perspectives and the books to read and you move out? Okay, maybe giving them to read is like show me, and involve me. How deep are you involving them? So the case study as an alternative to the field work, but you can also do field work beyond the case study, bringing in the experts. So tell me and I will forget. Show me and I may remember. But when you involve me, then I will understand. How deep do we go into this as facilitators? So as a good tutor, then in the case studies, you have to manage the group learning. Your role is to empower the learners and the learning process. How do you do that? You must manage the group learning. You should be a good listener so that you capture the experiences from these guys. You must direct the discussion in the case. If you do not direct the discussion properly, it can, stray and wave off. And, it's apparently seems encouraging, but when it is moving away completely from the purpose of the teaching, you have to stimulate students' interest and capture their participation. But as we said, you must keep focus on the focus of the case and the learning points. And you should be a good timekeeper. If you don't do good timekeeping, the case will be mismanaged. You have to establish, okay, depending on whether you are taking a divergent or a convergent approach. In the convergent approach, you need to have some level of consensus. But sometimes you might say, okay, bring as wild ideas as possible, then we agree to disagree, and we allow students to make their own independent decisions. It's up to you, depending on how you want it to be. And we should be approachable, we should be appropriate. Preparation is as important as the delivery itself. If you do not have proper pre-class preparation, then things are not going to work, both for lecturers and for the learners. Sometimes we distribute cases before the learning, depending on how wide it is. Sometimes we introduce cases at the beginning of the class, again, depending on how deep it is. So again, the structuring and sequencing becomes very important. The structuring and sequencing. You have a detailed case of 15 to 20 pages. You know, it has the introduction, it has the plot, the setup of the, then it has another section on realities, it has another section on innovations, it has another section as a pedagogic tool. Do you want to introduce it at a go? Give it students, they read from the beginning to the end? Or you might say, no, I'm going to sequence my case into 4 parts. The first 2 parts will be done in 1 week. The other 2 parts will be done in the second week. Depending on the objectives, you remember the Bloom's taxonomy. You say the first, these are bachelor students. I want them to read, you know, about the realities in why is Islam. And because of that, I will begin with the first part about the realities. That will be the first half of my teaching on the first day. I mean, the day you are using a case study. Then they read, you ask them, what is the reality on the ground? What are the conditions people are going through? What are the realities and the problems they are facing? They can be able to know, they can be able to remember. But because you want to attract their thinking and reasoning capacity, even if you have the session on innovations, end with the question, if you are a student, a scholar of entrepreneurship, if you went into that, what kind of entrepreneurship alternatives? You have it in the second session, but you do not want to bias students. You want by the time they go there, they have also creatively thought about that. You want them to look ahead. You do not want spoon feeding. I mean, we call it spoon feeding, that they must get everything. No. After setting the case, the reality on the ground, they can interact with the reality, they can relate with the reality, they know the problems and challenges. At the back of your mind, you know, the second part is about the innovations. But you do not want to bring them the innovations, you want them also to think about the innovations. You say, okay, that is the reality. If you are the entrepreneur in this reality, put them in groups. What kind of innovations would you introduce? So that in the second part, when you bring the innovations that you found out, then they can be able to compare their own innovations they suggested and the kinds of innovations that are on the ground. So as a facilitator, how are you going to introduce this? Do you give it to them and they read it at a go? Do you give it in bits? How best is it going to bring your teaching and learning outcomes out? We vary the way we do it. That's why how we do it will be consistent with the kind of suitable approach we want to use. If you want to generate consensus, I'm beginning with the lowest point down. If you want to generate consensus in terms of the data, you are going to use the convergent approach. The convergent approach. You say, what are the realities? How is the best? Evaluate our alternatives, and we come with the best alternative. At another moment, when you are dealing with mature and executives, you say, no, I don't necessarily need to bring about convergence. I need divergence of ideas. First of all, the reality is complex. There are different approaches. Even the actors themselves on the ground, although they're entrepreneurs, but they are taking different routes as far as innovation is concerned. So even in my case, I don't want to pretend to bring about convergence. I want to allow as divergence as it can exist, so that you are enabling creativity and explorative, all innovative thinking. You know, students can think innovatively about this and give it as many directions as possible. And each direction is justified, and you conclude. You may want to use, we talked about theory, either to apply or to develop a new theory. You say, no, the case study should not just be for, you know, simple reading and recalling and discussing. They should be able, there is that, you said, think of a dominant theory in entrepreneurship. And how would you use this case study to apply one that you think is most suitable? Or you say, hi guys, we must do something. And we do something when we create frames and frameworks? Can we develop our own theory to apply this case study to this particular situation? Then you go for the inductive approach. So it's when you are aware about these approaches that you will be able to say, okay, how am I going to use my case? And how is the case going to give me the kind of outcomes that I'm looking for? And I thought I should also talk about, the cases that we are talking about are text-based, which we write and publish as cases, but we have alternatives. We are living under COVID conditions. Now we are thinking about, alternatives. So there can be multimedia cases, and multimedia, they can have text, they can have videos, they can have audios. So you translate that text case into a multimedia kind of case, with instructions, with the directions, with videos and audios. Just like the lectures we are following from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., you structure your case in a way that you first come and explain the discipline and the teaching and the outcome. And it is the audio. And you even provide the text that outlines those issues. And then you have some videos when you are interacting with the people during the case study. What the manager said, what some entrepreneurs said, you pick some, not everything. Then you come to the way, when you invited some experts. So it is a multimedia kind of case, but which is kind of self-contained. It has the explanations, it has the videos capturing the views of these other people, it has the text kind of explaining, and you have questions you're asking students. How best do we go about that? We have live cases. Live cases, they are not yet prominent, where you have real people with real business challenges coming as guest lecturers, but present cases about their organizations, not just giving a simple topic, but presenting a case. And learners are immersed into the complexity of the business challenges. You can get someone to come and present a live case. It has its advantages, it has its disadvantages. It can be costly, bringing those people into, and unfortunately, it's one time, except if you do the recording and you can use their videos in the subsequent classes, if they accept. If they do not accept being recorded, then it will be usable for that particular class. It will not be replicated. We have online case. We are using online teaching and learning. We have both synchronous and asynchronous platforms. What we are doing now is synchronous. It is real time. We have asynchronous, where they can also be interactive. It's a platform. You can deposit coursework, you can deposit examinations, students can deposit their coursework, but you can also put a live chat where students can be in groups and discuss and share experiences online. From our own experience, as far as COVID-19 is concerned, and the transition from the traditional class into the online class, what are our own experiences? So that should be part of the conversation that you are bringing on board. Dr. Walugembe, are you there?
Yes, Doctor, I'm there.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and this is what I could share today. I give it back to you.
Dr. Dennis, I don't know what I can say, but you and your team, you have really done an extremely great job. Today, I was kind of really seeing that you have taken us into another presentation on philosophy. I really appreciate your knowledge and being grounded in the area of philosophy. Thank you very much, Dr. Dennis Musinguzi, for that good and wonderful presentation. The issue of personal teaching philosophy, I think most of us here who are teachers, we have learned a lot beyond teaching using case study, but teaching in general. And I think Dr. Dennis, with with the request of from our mentor, Professor Antai, we can have other series to come, because since we have most of our people here are teachers. The issue of teaching, you have really talked about it very, very well. And people understanding, there's a question you posed in the beginning, understanding education. But of course, I love you integrating all this in philosophy. What is your thinking ontologically, epistemologically, and use logic? So I think your use of logic across the board and the bit of bring out philosophy throughout has been extremely important on my side. I'm not part of the panel, I'm just a moderator, but I have appreciated your work. Allow me invite the panelists, or the members of the team, to give a comment. Then if you have a question, members will put up your hand. The three members are actually experts, Professor Chikoma, Dr. Musinguzi, and Dr. Diana. They have done a great job in this area, and I think if you have a question after the comment from Professor Chikoma and Dr. Diana, you will we shall have a few minutes to respond to those. But possibly, in the interest of time, you can be posting those questions in the chat, put them in the chat. As we move on, you can actually really look at them. Is Dr. Diana there? Allow me to invite Dr. Diana for a comment as a member of the team, and then I'll invite Professor Chikoma. Dr. Diana, are you online?
Yes, I am. Very good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much, Dr. Dennis Musinguzi, for this comprehensive and enlightening presentation. In your presentation, you raise a number of important issues to me, which really leaves a lot for us to take away. You pose the question on what education is and its purpose. And as we talk about using the teaching case study, we need to be able to go back and reflect on that question. You take us to the philosophy of education, whose understanding makes us reflect on our personal teaching philosophies. As individuals, we may not have thought about this, but in your presentation, you get us to think about the nature of the truth. What is the nature of truth? How does that impact on what we teach and how we teach? How do we align what we teach to the broader national goals, the institutions that we serve? Do we really appreciate the mission and vision, the goals, and the students' needs? So as you take us into teaching and learning with the case study, these are very important background questions that are going to support as we go along using the case study method. And then as we use the case study method, it is very important to reflect on why we have to do it and how do we use it as a learning tool to meet the needs of our students. You also bring the question of how do we know the case study is good? You will recall that when we started talking about the teaching case study, we said that it is important to use case studies that reflect the context in which we live, in which businesses run, in which our managers take decisions, so that they can reflect the true life situations. So how do we know we are using a good case study? Most of the time, I know we have used case studies from the Western world in the different disciplines where we are teaching. So I find this very important as we go along, and we know that as researchers, we already have data that we can use to write these case studies, whether they are published or not. At least we already know how to write one, and then we know how to know it is a good one. And so you share important tips on what constitutes a good case study. And you actually talk about the role of a tutor, lecturer. I have used the case study method to teach, and I have learned that it is always important to allow students to share different opinions, and not to influence what they're talking about, because then we will not have that divergence, as you mentioned, which allows for creative and explorative thinking. You should always, as a facilitator, desist from giving students straight answers. Your role is to guide them to discover. And I have actually found that when the classes are advanced, I find that the knowledge is in the room. Your role is to simply facilitate the sharing of that knowledge, because these students are managers, as you said, in your experience, Dr. Musinguzi, they are managers and they've taken decisions. So they can, your role is to simply support them to find what the case has, so that they go away with the skills. So the facilitator and the students have always, whenever we ask the question, what is the problem in the case? Students usually want to know, what is the problem? They want one answer, one right answer. And we have always told them, there is no one right answer to that question on what the problem is. But you allow them to have differing opinions, so that they can simply use the evidence from the case to defend their position. And after all, in the real life situation, different managers in different organizations see things differently, and which explains why different organizations perhaps are performing differently because of the way managers see things. But we emphasize that they need to use evidence from the case to support the positions that they've chosen. So the facilitator, I like the emphasis on the role of the facilitator to enable students discover what they should be discovering, and of course, taking away the skills. Of course, preparation is key on the part of the learners and the facilitators. As you mentioned, that you need to know the case as the facilitator very well. It's not a matter of just getting it to the class there, because in the class, you'll be surprised how students are going to analyze the case and come up with different positions. So you need to be able, you should be on top of your game, knowing this very well to allow you to guide the discussion in the class. I have also found that in situations where we asked students to read the case, some of them would actually come to class when they're not prepared. So emphasis should be laid on the learners reading the case before they come to the class to make the discussion productive. Otherwise, you'll find that in the class, the quality of the conversation is not that good, because people are reading the case, some of them are reading the case right there, and therefore you're not able to get what you want. So to me, these are very important issues. And I also liked the part of the multimedia, using multimedia case studies, especially in a period like this. And there's so much to take away. And I believe that a lot of people who are not on this platform would actually would benefit from another conversation like this. Thank you again, and back to you, our host.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diana Ntamu. Thank you for that, for your contribution and comment. Members, before I invite Professor Chikoma for a comment, allow me to recognize all of senior colleagues in the, who have been able to turn up today. Really, from our own Professor Joseph Untai, Dr. Musinguzi, our main speaker of the day, Dr. Kabagabe Jolly, Dr. Michael Okoche, another panelist, Dr. Diana Ntamu, Dr. Isaac Newton Kayongo, Dr. Ibrahim Musenze, Dr. Samuel Mayanja, Dr. Gret Sheyune, Dr. Nkurunziza Gideon, and our own professor, Professor Chikoma Julius. Professor, you have had this presentation from your colleague, from your teammate. I think it was wonderful, full of philosophy, very beneficial for the teachers. Allow me to invite you to give a comment, and then we move into the Q&A. Professor Chikoma, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. And Good morning, all those that are on this call this morning, for those who it is morning. I also join my colleagues, Dr. Dan and Ham, to thank our colleague, our fellow presenters, lead presenters in this discussion of case studies for the job well done. Dennis, you have done a wonderful job. And colleagues, I like to just, draw our attention to, the insights that we have actually been given from Dr. Dennis's presentation, where he was actually doing a very good job in trying to make the case of the intersection of philosophy of education and the case study method of teaching and learning, which is quite very common in the business schools and management schools, not only within our context in Uganda, but I think globally we see this kind of approach. And he has helped us to really be able to see the possibilities when you try to imagine, the role of education and how to use a case study to try and achieve, the goals of education. And a case study as taught or as a teaching tool, but also coming from a case study as a methodological approach from a research angle. I think this is very wonderful that we have been able to really get a lot of insights from what Dennis was giving us, and how we can really be able to, and the different ways that, case studies can be used in our learning environments. Learning environments here could be actually, various. It could be, group-based, participant-centered, and also, more importantly, how he has really even talked about the more contemporary environments that are now, dictated by the digital technologies that have been really occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. I think this, I thank very much Dr. Musinguzi for helping us to really see the different possibilities of case studies and the case method when we are using it in a teaching and learning environment, but also as researchers who are, constructing knowledge through case study and trying to publish it with the intention that it will be used as a teaching case. Now, I would like to speak quickly, particularly from the point that he really made around this question of the anatomy of the case study. And I liked the 6 questions that should be the point for a case study person who is using it in the classroom environment. Those 6 questions, I think all of us here should really consider them as very, very foundational. We are in a time where debates have really started being informed by, the question of decolonization of knowledge. And it is not a small debate that we are faced with contemporarily now, where everything now, in terms of the forms of knowledge that are available in the classroom, people are starting to be very, very critical about what kind of knowledges we're actually, sharing in the classrooms. And also the other side, the learners are starting to be sensitive and much more critical to the kind of forms of knowledge and what those forms of knowledge really do to the learner, what those forms of knowledge do to the people to whom they refer to, and so on. So I like the idea that this anatomy can be used as a tool for us to really critically check whether, you know, by employing the kind of case study that we want to use in class, will really be able to really achieve the goal, but also will it have impact? I like the question that he asked and the insights he gave us around the question of impact of the case study to the learner or to the learning environment, because that to me speaks to the issues of, you know, whether the teaching and learning has been effective in the first place, but also more importantly, in the question of relevance of the case as a teaching tool. Because, you know, when you use that question of why, the who, the where, you know, it brings, you know, very interesting, interesting revelations around the practice of teachers, the practice of those who use case studies to the fore. We have found that many times there is this quick fix solution that, you know, a teacher may want to use because there is a case study, there is a book of cases that has been published, and even the textbooks that we have been, you know, that have been sort of defined for the case are having cases, but those cases have a context. Those cases reflect a certain situation. And so when you use these 6 questions, it helps you, and it helps you to really make sense of, you know, whether it will serve the purpose and what it will do to the learners. Many times when we don't use these questions, we find that students are given knowledge, but when you scrutinize it and when you find a critical student, they find that the knowledge that is, you know, that is in this case has very little relevance. It does not resonate with their own experiences, nor does it really help them to imagine how they will solve contemporary problems that they need to solve, either as managers, either as people in the communities, and so on. So it really speaks to the challenge of, and the question that we now grapple with when we debate these things, that students that are using these published case studies, teachers who are using these case studies, which have not, you know, been critically put to that 6-question test, students are forced to learn content that is not really able to help them beyond the classroom environment. So we end up having a case of the student is inside the classroom, but is actually outside of the content in that classroom, because outside of that classroom, this person will not find anything that resonates with the content that that classroom actually gave. So what I would end with here is to really just suggest to us that I think the idea of a personal philosophy is a very powerful angle to really reflect on our practices as case study researchers first and foremost, because this platform is a PhD platform, which is basically that we are being honed into researchers. So as researchers, we should be able to be critical of the forms of knowledge that we are creating and what purpose they will serve and what impact they will have. When you decide to create a case study, for instance, about a community in Islam, it's about real people in Islam. What impact is it going to have? And what messages is this kind of case study going to send to the world about the community from which this case study is generated? So those are foundational questions, because they help when you are trying to really put context to this case study. It helps people to appreciate how you want to project the community in the first place, how you want to project the peoples in that community to the rest of the world. And for a critical scholar, that's very important. But also, those 6 questions are also important for the learners, who are going to use case studies as forms of increasing and gaining more knowledge through the classroom, so that they are not just passive recipients of the knowledge that is coming through the case study. But also, the 6 questions are very helpful to the practitioners, those decision makers that find that a case study approach or the cases that have been created and published for public consumption should also not just taken for the gospel truth, but these questions should help us to really interrogate whether these cases will serve the purpose for practice. I thank you very much, and back to you, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Professor Julius. Thank you for your contribution to this platform. We are really grateful. Members, just to inform you that next week, we shall be having the last presentation in this series of case study methodology. And the main speaker will be our own Professor Chikoma, trying to close the gaps in and there, tying the loose ends here and there, and the team will be behind him, Dr. Musinguzi and Dr. Diana. Members, thank you very much. Allow me move to, if there's a question from the participants in today's discussion, teaching using a case study methodology. And to me, I think the presenter did a great job in bringing up on board the issue of teaching in general and philosophy at large. Dr. Musinguzi, there are so many comments appreciating your work in the chat. People are saying thank you very much for that good job. However, possibly maybe we can go back to the question you posed in the beginning, in the remaining maybe 10 minutes to the end of this session. What is education? And in actual sense, you requested for our own perspectives on education. What do we think education is, and what could be our contribution? In the chat, I can see that we have a number of people that made comments, and I request them, let them mention them, read them out themselves. But let me begin with Teresa, whose hand is up to make a comment. I hope, Teresa, your comment is about the same. Teresa, you can unmute and say what you want to say.
Yeah, thank you so much for a very insightful presentation. Mine is just a simple one. Maybe either now or in the next week presentation, how best can we have the case study scenarios in class in the perspective of teaching financial accounting? Thank you.
Teresa is saying, I think Teresa, you would have said, for those who are teaching quantitative papers, because accounting, Teresa teaches accounting moves towards that area. So if I'm teaching financial management, quantitative methods or quantitative mathematics, I'm teaching financial accounting, advanced accounting. Allow me, how can I use? I think that could be answered. Dr. Musinguzi will make a comment over that. We can go back to our discussion if there's no other question on the issue of education. What is education really? We could have comments regarding the same, but Tom Belge, are you still online?
Yes, Doctor, I am on.
Yes, Tom, you responded to the question of Dr. Musinguzi.
Yes.
What was your answer?
Yes, basing on Dr. Musinguzi's explanation, I've a little bit changed my contribution, but let me first start with the new contribution, and then I'll read the other contribution on education and its purpose. With the new contribution, according to what I've heard from Dr. Musinguzi, is that it's a systematic way of discovering new ideas in comparison to the old ideas. Then the first contribution on education is a process of receiving a systematic instruction that is at school, either at school at university or any other learning institution, and enlightening the experience. With experience, for example, I thought of maybe if you were to appreciate someone's service, it has to be based on what kind of education. And on the purpose, it is an integral development of a person. It contributes to the betterment of a society as a whole, and it also makes the society in which people becomes aware of their rights and duties. Thank you very much. That's what I had as my contribution.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Tom, I wanted to ask, maybe you have gone off, the difference between your first contribution and second contribution. It seems you changed your mind after listening to Dr. Musinguzi. You changed.
Exactly.
Yes. So what is that? Where is the difference?
The difference is that we, as it regards to the second contribution, is that after hearing Dr. Musinguzi's lecture, I came up with a new idea that if you want maybe to use a case study as he was explaining to us, you have to listen the new ideas from the audience, and from the new ideas is whereby you gather the information and make a comparison, compare the ideas from the audience with yours, and come up with the exact information that you put forward.
Okay.
And with the first one, it's just a process of learning, whereby one will just go to the school, enter in a class, and start receiving ideas. So according to what I've heard, according to what I've learned, we need to be flexible and creative.
Fine. Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Let me pick the two people who have put up their hands. And then we can close this. I have Wendo, and Wendo, then Joseph, I'll give you 1 minute each, and then we shall go into the closing session. Wendo?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm happy with the definition that Tom has given. And also, I would like to just...
Wendo, you're from Zimbabwe?
No, I'm from Barara University.
From Barara University, okay.
Yes, I'm a PhD student and a teacher.
Okay, we proceed.
Yeah, so I was trying to say that it is very important to include in these definitions that we have given. I know education is a two-way process, as they have presented, because the learners also have something. We don't have to treat them as a tabula rasa or empty some containers which we just have to fill the knowledge, because it's a two-way process. The teachers also learn from the learners, because there's that component of feedback. And also another thing that I wanted to add is that education has to lead to some sort of transformation or change. So in addition to the definitions that we are giving here in the platform, we have to remember that it's a two-way process, and it's a process that has to lead to transformation or to a change. Because before you get education, there is some process which goes on. After that, it leads to transformation. So we expect someone who is educated has changed in terms of behavior and so on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendo. Julius, your hand was Joseph Elasu. shall get a comment from you, and then I'll move on to the facilitators. Yes, Joseph?
Thank you very much, Doctor. Mine is an inquiry. In these definitions, I have had two very important words that are featuring. I have had structured. I've also had the systematic. And in my little understanding and as a teacher, this seems to draw my attention to formal kind of education. Now, what happens to the informal education? Isn't that part of what we should be thinking as well? Because when we talk about teaching, it doesn't, begin and end in the classroom alone. It's also outside there. So what's the comment on that? Thank you very much.
Joseph, I missed the last part of your question. I don't know whether Dr. Musinguzi captured it, because I will call him back to react. Can you repeat the last part of your question?
So I said that I have had two words, that's structured and systematic. And I was saying that this, in my small understanding, is most likely to draw me to the formal kind of education. I am now inquiring that what happens to informal education? Where does this apply? What do we say about education outside the setup of the school, which is formal? That is what I thought I would seek inquiry on.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Joseph, for that question. In the interest of time, we shall not take other questions, but there are some comments from the chat. I think Dr. Elizabeth is saying education is a transformation process, that allows for both instructors and learners to experience and influence, to drive intellectual and emotional discussions. And so many people have comments in the chat over the same. The writer in the beginning posed a very big question on what is education, and sorry, the presenter. And I think the whole discussion of Dr. Musinguzi today, whereas he tried to bring out the issue of teaching using a case study methodology, but he really elaborated a lot on the issue of education in general. One of my teachers of education in philosophy of education, Dr. Musa. Dr. Musa, I will give you a chance to give one comment within a minute. You may have missed the beginning part of the presentation, but you can make a comment, and then I will invite, allow me invite Dr. Chogavire, whether still online. I'm not seeing her. If she will come in to make closing remarks. If she's not on, Dr. Musenze Ibrahim, the Dean Faculty of Business and Management Studies at Stoma University, will give us the closing remarks. If Dr. I think she has left, Dr. Chogavire. Dr. Matov, are you online?
Yes, I am online, Dr. Walgembe.
Dr.
Can you
Matov,
hear me?
Yes, you can give a comment, and then Dr. Matov is the Director of Research at Islamic University in Uganda.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walgembe, and the facilitators of the day. Sorry, I came in a bit late to join the group, but I'll first like to thank for joining me into the group. It has been quite a wonderful presentation and discussion from the members. Thank you for choosing this topic for today. I would like to just add two things on the presentations. One, from all the discussions, is if we are talking about education and case studies and research as well, one of the things that would be key, what we would look at is the novelty of the studies. It has been mentioned, but that's very, very important. What great contribution would be the study adding to knowledge? However much we fancy it, we need to look at the novelty of the study and its level. Is it low novelty, high novelty, or medium novelty? So that's very important, because at the end of the day, however good the study is, we must look at its contribution to the body of knowledge and solving solutions. Then briefly, the second one is what we have always ignored when we are looking at such studies, because when we are making research and studies, we must, and we are looking at their contribution and their novelty to society and the bodies of knowledge, we must not today forget science. And the science today mainly is digital, is computer related, and so on. So those, or we must look at how does our body of knowledge we are studying as a case study add to the body of knowledge and basically science, because that's what is rotating today. Basically, there are studies that might not be science-based and purely arts or qualitative in nature. But then that's very important, that if we have a direction, we can add our body of knowledge to science. We need to focus and factor those aspects into our studies. Those are the two comments I would like to add, Dr. Olgembe, tonight.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matovu, and thank you for joining us. Allow me to invite Dr. Dennis Musinguzi to respond to the two questions, and then we shall invite Dr. Musenze to give the closing remarks. Dr. Dennis, you have two comments, one from Teresa on using case study methodology for quantitative subjects, and then to the informal teaching. We are talking about so much, we have emphasized so much the issue of systematic and being formal, and the informal issue, the question from Joseph. Dr. Dennis?
Okay, thank you so much, our moderator. One, when I asked what is education and what is its purpose, my purpose was not to find a standard definition of education, and I only wanted to create, that mindset in the minds of the people in the group. How do they perceive education? How do they know education? What impression does education make to them? But as I was presenting, of course, I said we have different philosophies, we have different approaches to education. Wendo mentioned the word tabula rasa. Some scholars in teaching and learning think students, they don't have knowledge, their minds are empty. So that's why we're using the word imparting knowledge. Others are saying, no, the knowledge cannot be easily imparted, and some other people have knowledge. So you have to develop and transform. Yes, we're talking much about structured and systematic, because we are speaking in the context of research and methodology and teaching and learning. But yes, that the other different forms of education, we talk about formal, informal, non-formal. We couldn't have invited all these things into a single presentation. And as Dr. Musa was mentioning, my role was to talk about teaching with cases. But I wanted to say, no, it's not just getting a case and getting into class. The background educational issues that one has to have in mind if they are to be effective with the kind of pedagogical approaches. So it wasn't kind of a presentation on broad education per se, but we talked about systematic and structured because we were talking about in the context of research and in the context of teaching and learning environment. But education, of course, is beyond than that. The question of accounts and case studies, I wish I could get a volunteer from class to share their own experience. When I was preparing, there is a case which I wanted to use, but the colleague told me, no, if you want to use it, you need to buy it from Harvard School. I don't know whether I'm infringing on the rights, but okay, not the typical case, but there is this young professor who was teaching for in the first year or second year of teaching, and he gets a class of quantitative something, purely quantitative, and he gives a case of an organization which had, certain inputs and flows, and the case was asking them to compare certain things. And who are the students in class? These are top managers, CEOs, and blah, blah, blah. So he comes, I gave you the case. Can you please share your experience? The first shares a wrong answer. The second shares a wrong answer. The third one begins well, but faults along the way and goes to wrong conclusion. The class was an hour and 30 minutes. It is 10 minutes the end of the class. None of the participants has gotten it well. Until a young student who did not have even the experience put up her hand and said, look here, for me, I did like this. I compared the case A with case B. And then the lecturer realized, yes, that was the right way. He said, tell me, what did you do? I compared A and I compared B. What did you find out? It was this and this and this. What kind of conclusion did you arrive to? This was the conclusion. She had it very well, but it was 2 minutes past class. He moved out without even mentioning whether it was right or not. And then, of course, the students being big and blah, they started molesting and making fun of the student. And in the subsequent classes, she decided to keep quiet and not even contribute. And of course, the questions would be, do you mind what you are teaching? If you are teaching quantitative class, is quantitative something that, students are excited about? Or it is something, if they know it is Dr. Musinguzi going to teach them quantitative things, they start calling him Dr. Musinguzi quantitative even before they meet him. What kind of students, what I was talking about, and how are you going to introduce the case and that kind of thing. So the philosophy and the approach is the same, whether it is in quantitative or not quantitative. But as we said, if you are going to give a quantitative, kind of case, what is the subject? What is the particular thing are you trying to establish? Have the student understood the measures you want them to know, to bring out in the class and reflect on? And what happens when half of the class are actually aversive to quantitative, and when you give the case, they switched off their minds and they have not even done anything. So the applicability for the principles and the frameworks are the same. It's the details where we, might be particular to certain situations. So briefly, that's what I can say. But it is the same way, the same principles. If we have a volunteer in the class, can share their own experience, I mean in the audience. Back to you, Dr. Ahmad. It's 5 minutes past the normal schedule.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Musinguzi. I think we may not allow others to come in for comments because of time. We have moved beyond our normal schedule of 6:30, and really we appreciate your contribution. Dr. Musinguzi have done a great job. The team members, Professor Chikoma and Dr. Diana, we really appreciate you. Allow me to invite Dr. Musinguzi for the vote of thanks and the closing prayer. Dr. Musinguzi?
Hello?
Yes, Dr. Musinguzi, you are clear.
Okay. I want to take this opportunity to thank the presenters of the day, particularly Dr. Musinguzi, for the very, very insightful presentation. And I'm sure we've really gained much. I want also to thank the team that has really backed him up to really bring the point home. And I'm certain that all of us have actually gained more knowledge when it comes to the case-based learning. We really appreciate that. Particularly, we were happy and glad when you really brought up the issue of the linkage of the case study approach with the pedagogical kind of strategy and philosophy in teaching or using the cases to deliver. I want to thank all participants on this call for their sacrifice, for the time, for the commitment,